Welcome back to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to business continuity, resilience, disaster planning, COVID, crisis management, anything that's relatable to those topics. Speaking of topics, if you'd like to be a guest on the show or have us talk about a specific topic, please feel free. You can reach me through LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick on LinkedIn, so you can certainly find me quite easily. Just send me a message and I return all messages. Today, I'm going to jump straight into the topic. Today is part two of a video and recording we did just, I guess, not even 2 weeks ago. It's part two. So some of you might recognize my guest with a new background there, I see. So I'd like to welcome back to the show. We're going to talk about Presilience, part two. Dr. Gavriel Schneider. Gav, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Alec. Great to be back and really looking forward to continuing our discussion.
Yeah, for anyone that didn't know, we actually had an agenda and we addressed about that much, because we had so much to talk about, and which I thought was fantastic. So I invited Gav back to come back and hopefully maybe finish our agenda here.
Well, we certainly will give it a try.
Yeah, we'll see where we go. Just in case anybody didn't see part one, can you give a quick condensed version of your bio? And then I've got one other question for you, and then we'll jump straight into today's stuff.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Dr. Gavriel Schneider, everyone calls me Gav. I'm the CEO of the Risk to Solution Group, which is a group of risk-related companies doing security, safety, medical and health, risk consulting, cultural change, and technology. Started my career originally as a professional bodyguard back in South Africa, where I grew up. Became fascinated with the way people make decisions. Spent my academic career researching better decision-making, better training, and better preparation. For the past 5 years, I've been program director of ACU Executive Education's postgraduate program in the psychology of risk. And about 3 years ago, we founded this idea of Presilience and have been talking a lot about how we build individuals, teams, and organizations that thrive in uncertainty, volatility, and complexity. So I guess that's about as short as I can make it, Alex.
Yeah, that's fine. And you even touched on my next question. If you could give a quick overview, a minute or two of Presilience, just in case somebody didn't hear our first episode.
Sure, perfect. So the easiest way to really understand why Presilience is to look at the maturity model we've built. And the way we look at the maturity model is that most industrial age thinking, managerialism-centric organizations focus on compliance as their driver to get performance and outcomes. Compliance is great when we have stability, we have oversight, and we have absolute authority. Three things that we very rarely have in this, remote working, complex, uncertain world we live in. So most organizations have accepted the need for resilience, or the ability to be able to bounce back, weather disruption, continue through adversity. We found in our research and in our consulting business, and even in the training, that with a resilience mindset, it is certainly better than compliance, but it still comes with some challenges. First and foremost, the idea of resilience is that we are tough enough to persevere, and it doesn't really talk much about prevention and preparation, even though we know in disaster recovery, for example, there's a lot of discussion around it. It's the hard part to do, so we don't see it done much. But primarily, the idea of resilience is that we bounce back as quickly as possible to the point we were at pre-disruption. And the whole business continuity focus is how quickly can we get to where we were before disruption. As COVID and anybody who's weathered a tough time and learned will attest to, we learn so much through adversity that often why would you want to return back to where you were before disruption? Because we've learned a better way, or we've found another gap or an opportunity. And this opportunity-centric focus is really what made us look at Presilience. It's around how do we bounce forward? How do we bounce back better, not just bounce back? So those are the two differentiators.
That's what I was going to ask you, because that phrase bounce back grabbed my attention right away. And I'm going, but if we go through adversity, shouldn't we come out of it better than before, rather than, back at the beginning? That's why it drives me crazy when COVID's over, we'll be back to normal. No, we should be in a better position.
Absolutely. And you've just nailed why we felt we had to drive this Presilience model forward. There's so much jargon already out there. Adding more terminology is not always a good idea.
Yeah.
But as we discussed on the last one, even when I was doing that keynote for the Business Continuity Institute, the discussion we had with the organizers was the world of resilience is so messy. Cyber resilience, disaster recovery, individual resilience. Nobody owns it, but everybody claims to own it.
And everyone's got a different definition for it.
Exactly right. But to your point, why would we just want to focus on continuity instead of innovation, adaptation, and improvement? Yeah. Because if we're not, we will get disrupted again and again and again. So it's a fundamental shift. And I think that the real key of it is, because the world has changed, we have to keep changing and we have to keep adapting. And it is fatiguing, it is frustrating, particularly for humans. When we look at the neuroscience and the biology, we're wired for stability. We want homeostasis. But if we want to thrive, and this is about thriving, I don't think any professional or any real serious practitioner of any of the risk-related aspects, again, whether it's security, safety, cyber, it doesn't really matter, ever wants to just maintain a status quo. We always know that our opposition, if it's security, for example, our opposition is working hard to figure out where our vulnerabilities are. I quote Tony McGurk, one of my mentors who helped out with a lot of the Presilience stuff. He's a fire chief from the UK. And he often says, well, nobody ever told the fire what your plan was and how it should behave according to your plan.
That's true.
And, I think we get fixated with this planning. And in reality, it often just is a waste of resources. Not saying we shouldn't plan, but the idea of being adaptable, flexible, and building core attributes is really where we drive Presilience.
I think sometimes we focus in, and not just business continuity, but people in general spend so much time passing while the rest of the world is changing and going right by you. So when you think you're finished planning, you've prepared for something that's way back there. You're not there anymore.
It's so true. And COVID was and is a great example of that. I think we discussed last time, and I'm sure you've discussed with many of your guests, most big organizations had pandemic response plans, but they were 10 years old, not fit for purpose, didn't look at the real magnitude of a threat, and therefore, really were, as we discussed in our last interview, risk theater. We were pretending we were okay, but they actually didn't add the value.
Yeah, I agree completely. So let's jump in to one of the pieces we didn't capture last time, and that is, what is Presilience for individuals? And you had a whole bunch of things that fell under this.
100%. So thanks for the opportunity to start this way, because I in teaching the psychology of risk program for the last 5 years, we've learned a lot around the sequential steps we need to actually thrive. And I didn't coin it, but I love the little acronym WIFM, what's in it for me? Because when we look at psychology, if there isn't a WIFM, people will not engage, they will not apply the concepts. So this is where most organizations make the mistake, where they look at what's in it for the organization first, and then they try and fit the individual into the organization. So the idea really with personal Presilience is, if I'm not going to build the capability for me to make great decisions, both under pressure and in everyday life, the ability for me to accept the fact that I will get disrupted and that my plans may not happen the way I want them to, and develop that agility and resilience to push through, then why would I do it for my team or my business? So from an individual perspective, this is the starting point of everything. I talk about it in a 4-tier model. So the model really starts with you. If you, and I say this to everyone I teach, and I say this to myself all the time when I find myself reacting in an inappropriate way. If you can't control the voice in your own head, if you can't build habitual responses to be effective, you're not going to be good at decision making. And if you're not good at decision making, you're not going to be good at life.
And that's tough. That's really tough to do.
Absolutely.
Like you, I do that too. Every so often, I've got to step back going, hold on, think about it. What's going on?
And, a simple example of that is when we look at all the research done into decision making, and there's so much wonderful research that's been done by people like Daniel Kahneman and Dan Ariely and the list of social scientists and behavioral scientists and behavioral economists who've looked at this stuff is huge, and the ability to access this information is out there, but very rarely do risk, business continuity, or the derivative pieces look at that stuff. They kind of go, oh, that's touchy-feely. But that's the stuff that makes things work.
Yeah, it is.
So it's quite simple. Having taught decision-making now for about 6 years, and we run a 9-month program through a university just to get on top of it. People always say to me, Gav, just give me I don't have time for 9 months. Give me the short, the one sentence. And if you want to get good at decision-making from a personal perspective, it's around building the best possible habitual behaviors to be able to make sure that the business as usual stuff happens automatically and your decisions are wired correctly, because roughly 95% of our decisions will be automatic. We will use, as Daniel Kahneman refers to it, system one, or the intuitive part of the brain. But it's having the wisdom to know when to switch on your system two, or the risk manager of your mind. And actually, it's actually not that complex when you think about it. It involves two things. It involves, in the modern day, urgency and importance. And if we can't measure what's urgent and important and allocate our limited resources, and when I say limited resources, we're still talking on the personal level, right? There's two things individuals have in very finite amounts, and that's time and energy. Time you never get back, energy you have to refill. So if we spend our time and energy on things that are neither urgent nor important, and we find frustration in not achieving results, it's not a surprise. It's much harder in the modern world to do this than it ever has been before because of information overload, echo chambers, false news, etc.
So how does that's got me thinking now with decision making and all the news that's out there, especially I guess with the US election, I'll use that as an example, and everything that has occurred around that. How do you keep emotion out of that? Because a lot of people make decisions based on emotions, without actually thinking logically and taking that step back, like you said.
I love talking to you about this stuff because you get it. It makes my life much easier to explain these concepts. So this is where the intersection comes. When we've looked at Presilience, we've actually said Presilience consists of three things. It's the risk and decision making, it's high performance, and it's leadership. You need those three attributes if you want to thrive, if you want to be a high performer. So when we actually look at emotional control, it's fascinating because when we look at the research done into leadership, there's all this stuff out there about being authentic, being yourself in the workplace, except we know, and let's talk worst case scenarios because they're the easiest ones to get. And looking at the clouds in your screensaver behind you, there's good priming. But realistically, it doesn't help that you have this empathy, this emotional capability, but you let it all out during a crisis. Therefore, poor at decision-making when we need to be analytical, logical, and sequential and authoritative. On the flip side, it doesn't help that you are, command and control driven during business as usual when we should be building rapport, trust, and strong teams so that we can weather disruption. So the challenge we've got is this is not easy. Everybody who says it, we've got the winning formula. I've been working on this stuff for 6 years now, and actually my whole career, and it's a work in progress consistently. I look at the graduates of our programs. They are constantly working on things at an individual level. Then if they're supervisors or leaders, they're working on the team's component. And remember, I mentioned 4 levels at the start: individual. Mm-hmm. So first, I need to focus on me. Then I can look at others. And if second I'm looking at others, I'm already looking at teams and potentially stepping into the leadership mindset. Then we can look at organizations, okay, which are macro beasts and have their own.
So how come there isn't a management level in there?
So the management level is the second level. That's so me, others, okay, organization. And throughout this is and it's a really good question you asked, because people often listen to a lot of what we teach and they say, well, that's great, but you're talking all about leadership, not management. And we're saying, yes, it's true, because management skill sets are highly evolved. We've been looking at management since the first industrial revolution. We've had 300 years of practice to develop management. Leadership has been ignored for the most part. So it's not that leadership is more important than management or management is more important than leadership. High performers in the modern world actually need both skill sets, or at the very least, the wisdom to know where they're stronger.
Mhm.
I like to talk about a concept, and again, this is one of those. I'll share the little anecdote because it's quite funny how it happened. I've been for years, ever since my bodyguard career transitioned into me mentoring, guiding, and training others, talking about the need for leaders to be both strategic and tactical at the same time. You can't only be one or the other, otherwise we don't thrive. And I can't simply divide tasks for staff based on you're at this level or this level in the hierarchy. Because we know now with social media and everybody being plugged in 24/7, your lowest level employee could actually cause you the biggest disruption, or they could give you the biggest innovation. It's not just, the CEO or the chairman of the board anymore. So the game's changed. And I was giving this lecture about 2 years ago, actually to the Department of Defense. And I had a guy come up to me afterwards and he goes, "Gav, you're right." And obviously we all like to hear that sort of thing. But he said, he was from Army Intelligence, and he said they've started calling the skill set tactical, a combination of strategic and tactical. And that's the skill set they're trying to build. So this is the interesting piece. When you are looking just at yourself, we tend to focus primarily on the tactical. When I shift to that next level, when I'm looking at others, we need strategy, because otherwise, how do we understand what others need to get them on the same page?
Mhm.
When we look at organization, if we don't understand ourselves, we don't understand others, organizational structuring, strategy, goals, risk management, continuity, most of those things then become risk theater again. We build all this stuff, but when we get disrupted, it doesn't work or add value. The last level, and I normally stay clear of this level, because if you haven't achieved competency in the other three, it's wishful thinking, is when we talk at a societal level. And we talk about how would we change society's ability to respond or do things. And it's really interesting. I spoke last year, the Institute of Strategic Risk Management ran their first large global conference, and it was a virtual one, and there were about 900 people from around the world on it, and some super smart speakers, like really intelligent people. But it was all up here. They were all talking about the problems with society and the problems with our response capabilities and why we failed so badly with COVID and how we're set to fail again. And for me, listening to these experts, I was going, the piece that we're missing is the individual. What do we need individuals to do to change their behavior, to influence others so that the societal change takes place? And that's sort of become my passion now, because we can talk about all these societal level things, but if we don't get the others right, none of them stick, or they take
Yeah.
an exceptionally long time to work.
Well, it's also easy to point out all the things that are going wrong, and speak up here, especially with academics. They speak up here, and this is the way it should be, and but then trying to trickle that down to, as you said, the individual, the people who are actually going to do this, the people who have to come up with the plans and everything. There's a disconnect,
You've nailed
and
it.
how do you bring those together? For one, go ahead.
No, but you're exactly right. And I think these are the opportunities that are presented to us in the modern world that historically, and this is a fascinating thing. The more we've been researching this idea of presilience and how it works, the more we've actually found, when you go back to, let's talk about the age of discovery, where, Columbus set off in his ship and, discovered a new place, and, Cook came to Australia and discovered Australia. Those were very loosely coupled management systems, and they were empowered management systems. Those explorers were given authority based on the skills that were developed in their earlier careers, and they were trusted to go out and do it. We've almost come full circle now, where we are back to that a little bit now, where we're at the point where we can't control everything, we can't control everyone, and if we do, we don't get the best outputs anyway. So, the fundamental difference though between then and now is technology. We are technologically enabled in a way we never have been before, which means our ability to magnify decisions, the ability to be influenced by external factors, and the ability to influence has never been greater or easier. All of those things
Does
come
that
with
prove
risk.
to be a drawback as well? That sometimes
Absolutely.
we rely too much on the technology to make the decisions for us, that it comes back to bite us later on.
100%. So this is a fascinating segue, but let's go with it because it's really important. we went through a period, and if you think about it, and I'm sure your listeners will be thinking about it, let's say 2005 to 2015, everyone was talking about big data. How do we get more data? How do we analyze the data? How do we quantify risk out of analyzing that data so we make better decisions? There's been all these studies done now showing that, well, no matter what we do, bias creeps into data analysis, and that bias then continues to set trends and influence decision making. So don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of big data, and I'm a fan of analytics, and I'm a fan of risk quantification. As we said last time, I am an acknowledged risk nerd. I love everything to do with risk. But the problem we've got is some decisions happen too quickly. We don't have time to be able to access that data. In many cases, it becomes information overload because there's now too many variables to consider, so our decision-making gets further skewed. Collaborative decision-making is great. It's one of the most effective ways to manage bias, but collaborative decision-making doesn't work really well in a crisis. So,
and that leads me to another point, because you touched on this earlier on. During crises, and with all this data, how is it that some people that are in leadership roles tend to fail? They don't seem resilient. They can't make decisions. They kind of fall apart. And yet somebody who's not a leader, not a manager, not a team leader, suddenly turns around and is able to take charge, and they go the opposite direction. They become the leader, and can make quick decisions, can analyze things. How does that happen? That people change spots.
We're going to need a round 3 of this conversation, but let me answer the question, because you've nailed the crux of why most crisis management response teams fail. Because what we've done, based on managerialism and hierarchical thinking that we were programmed with over the last 300 years from the industrial age forward, is we've related management capability back to leadership capability, and we've confused the two. So very often people have climbed to the top of organizations for 2 reasons. One, they were good at a job. So the perception was, I'm good at this job, so I will keep becoming good at the next job. Or 2, they've either been able to cover up their mistakes, or they haven't made significant mistakes. And there's a whole discussion we can have about the corporate psychopath and the corporate sociopath and how they
I've got
climb
lots
to the
of
top.
stories on those.
And managerialism centricity actually favors those, because people who are not affected by emotion, who can make hard, cold decisions without caring what other people think or feel, thrive in management environments. What happens when we're in crisis is different. So when we're in crisis, we have to understand all the pieces we have, which is the managerialism component, but the leadership pieces come to the fore. And some of us are wired differently from others. It's not good or bad. We just have different skill sets. So to thrive in a crisis, first and foremost, we need very good adrenal control. We need the ability to manage our own adrenaline, control our own flight or fight instincts, so we don't freeze and don't panic. Most managers who have worked their way up the food chain have never had to develop that, because they're sequential, structured, and focused in what they do. They also usually have time to give orders, follow up on those orders, implement and control. In a crisis, as you know, the key defining term is that it's overwhelming. So because it's overwhelming, we need people who won't panic when they're overwhelmed. And it's fascinating, even in our own consulting business, we do a lot of crisis emergency management capability uplift, and we primarily train people on 4 attributes. Situational awareness, mindfulness, and vigilance forms the first part. So if I can't even scan my environment, figure out what's happening around me, and be focused enough to act, all the others are irrelevant. Then we can get into critical thinking, which is the ability to evaluate different pieces of information to make the best possible decision, which is the next sequence. It's actually making decisions. And the challenge when we make decisions is sometimes, and I use this often, but this is the way I describe it. All we can ask of anybody under pressure is to make the best possible decision based on the best available intelligence, and me and you will have a chat shortly about information versus intelligence, in the most appropriate time frame. And sometimes it's about not making the decision until we get more intelligence. Other times it's about accepting the fact that more information or intelligence is not going to help you make a better decision. and you've got to have the courage to do it. So decision making itself is actually an art we have to teach, not something we assume people can do. And then the fourth variable, the fourth skill set we teach under pressure, and I'm just talking about the crisis decision making pieces, is the ability to apply effective and directive communication. And I'll just spend a few minutes on that one quickly because it's so important.
We have to take a break because we're already, like we always do, we're over time already, and I know we can keep going. So keep that point and we'll be right back.
Thanks, Alex. And as a segue, I'm sure you have done this many, many times, but when you look at all these, post-disaster reviews, post-incident reviews, all the research done into lessons learned, I can guarantee you one of the things you'll always find is a comment like, it was a failure in communications. Communications could have been better. Had this been communicated more effectively, our response would have been different, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, again, like we discussed in the first one, if comms is a problem, why aren't we fixing it? Why do we keep making the same mistake? And what I wanted to explore very quickly is that it's never been harder to get good at effective directive comms than it is today. And I'll quantify that for you with a few examples. So political correctness, and don't get me wrong, I'm not against the idea of making sure we are non-offensive, but almost every expert and leader I talk to today says they spend a lot of time analyzing their emails, thinking about what's coming out of their mouth so they don't offend. In reality, what they're trying to do is try and understand somebody else's mindset and sensitivities so they can change a narrative for that. It's got nothing to do with the idea of intent. So in other words, if I didn't intend to offend you and you got offended, where's the vulnerability there? And even as I've explained that, we can see how much time, effort, and energy anybody who's functioning in the modern world has had to learn to be politically correct. Otherwise, you can't function. We spend a huge amount of energy doing that, to the point that when we're in a crisis, we are not effective at comms anymore because we are so wired to overthink, hyperanalyze, and try and figure out how we're not going to offend people. We can't be directive anymore. So there's two parts to this comms under crisis capability. The first is training ourselves to actually be able to flip and go, well, during business as usual, I'm collaborative, I'm empathetic, I really do want other people's opinions because that's how we manage our biases. But under crisis, we also have to train ourselves to flip and go, now I have to be effective and directive. Mm-hmm. But also we have to train people to receive that communication and act on it without taking offense. And we're struggling with that.
Yeah, I think, and I've seen it happen, is as people do that, they water down. What they end up doing is watering down their message. I don't like to use the term dummy down that some people use because that is offensive.
Yes.
But they water down the message, and then the point that they want to get conveyed doesn't get conveyed at all. And during a disaster, the second part is, when you are trying to communicate, the demand for communication goes up and the amount of time you have to do it goes down.
Exactly right. And this is why we've said effective and directive, not one or the other for crisis or emergencies. For business as usual, it's different. You have to build really robust emotive capability, rapport building skills. And to close the loop on this, every time we train people in these four skill sets, right? Situational awareness, critical thinking, decision-making, effective directive comms, I'm always saying to people, when is the best time to prepare for a crisis or disruption? And they all look at me like, stupid question, like not when you're dealing with a crisis. It's in the pauses between. The problem is during those pauses between, we fall back into business as usual, which means we're not building the skill sets. And you as an experienced professional in this will know, one of the things experts always want to do is exercise, test, and practice more. And the constraints around budget, time, and all those things stop that from happening in a way that really has benefit. So, we've got to think differently. And this is where, we started our discussion talking about the individual. This is where the focus has to go back to. And if we think about the way we've educated people up until very recently, it has been, this is how you fit into society. These are the rules you follow. Don't think for yourself, follow the rules, don't adapt, don't innovate, follow the rules, and you will be successful. You will be a good member of society. Now we're in the world where we're going, hold on a second, the most successful people are people who think of ways to disrupt or innovate. The most successful people are people who are able to adapt when things change around them. And most of our education system doesn't develop that skill set. So it's up to the organizations now to go, blame and history, looking backwards doesn't help. What we have to do is change the leadership mindset to go, let's build people. Let's build our people to thrive in their individual lives, so they make great decisions based on the best intelligence, etc. And they are productive at home, just like we want them to be productive at work. They take those skill sets, and I think I briefly mentioned the whole of person model I like to teach, work life, virtual life, personal life. They take those skill sets and they apply them across all three. They don't only do them when they're at work or when they're at home. And that's how we start to build robust performance. Then the next step is the leadership piece around how we glue teams together and how we structure organizations to be high performing. That's a whole different discussion. But this idea of building people, if your listeners are the people who I think they are, the fact that they're already listening means they get it. They're already looking for the clues that will make them thrive more. And it's a continuous journey, but what we have to do, and this is the conundrum, right? It's not about taking the old, and when I say the old, it's the managerialism, centric, cookie cutter, systems focused approach only. It's not about saying that doesn't work, because without that, we can't scale, we can't have consistency, and we can't get outputs. It's about taking that, but now superimposing those skill sets with it to get the best of the old with the best of the new. And there's a slightly different formula for every organization that's required. It's not as simple as just going, well, do this online course and you'll be fine.
Now, that's where I wanted to ask a question is, how do you get that started? Because do the corporate leadership have to get this in their head before they can get, I don't want to say push it down, but get it embedded into their organization? And then, at the same time, at the end of the year, you get these performance reviews where they tell you what you're supposed to do, which is almost like pigeonhole you. You need to learn this, be stronger on these weaknesses, and it's like, well, wait a minute. You want me to do all of this on this hand, but then at the end of the year, you do a performance review and tell me everything I'm not doing, and it's like, they don't align.
Exactly right. So this is the fascinating study outcome we've had from all the people we've trained over the last 6 or 7 years, is the outdated managerialism centric approaches of KPI management around very specific segmented outcomes become pigeonholing, right? We go, and I'll give you an example of that. Say I work in a call center, my performance indicator or my performance requirement is I must make 20 calls in an hour. So generally speaking, once I've made 20 calls, there's no more incentive for me to make 21. There's also no incentive for me to go, actually, I make 20 calls, only one of those calls is useful. How do I actually get the other 19 to be useful? So this is where the resilience model actually comes into play. We have to move from the compliance mindset to the resilience mindset first, and then we can look at presilience. So to answer your question directly, I'll give you a few examples. You are exactly right. Generally speaking, because most organizations are still hierarchically dominant, the way to start is the top. And where we found good success with this is a project champion, usually within the C-suite, who for whatever reason is frustrated and wants to do better. They get this idea. Normally what happens then is we would do a brief for executive team that they would like the brief or not like the brief. If they like it, we then would go up to the board and do a board brief. That usually results in us then coming back and going, right, what does the organization need? And designing a cultural change program. Having said that, some of the best projects we've...
Sorry to interject, but who owns that cultural change program?
Lovely. And this is super cool, because who owns it usually determines the likelihood of success. And we've found numerous challenges with this, because I'll go back to and I'll ask the question, who owns risk and resilience in an organization? And it's a trick question.
Everybody does.
Thank you. You passed. You're a rock star, Alex. but the truth of it is, if everybody owns it, then everybody should buy into it. Therefore, consensus is a challenge because of siloing. So the bigger the organization, and we've now sort of jumped the teams thing straight into the org thing, but that's fine. Let's keep going with the organization because that's where most listeners are frustrated. They work in an organization. I believe people who listen to your show are probably people who want to do better, as we said. So they're looking for these clues and they're frustrated because they can't get the best outputs that they want. The challenge is multifaceted. It comes back, and this is why we've glued leadership and high performance together with Presilience, because one without the other just doesn't work. You could be the best at decision making, but if you can't enact your decision, i.e. perform the task, who cares? Doesn't work. I could be the best doer, the best actioner, but if my decisions are poor, I'm wasting my time and resources. So to answer your question directly, we've looked a lot at change theory in the last few years. Because of technology and because of the way the human centrism is creeping into the modern world in a positive way, we can leverage influences better. So there's two theories I like to use with this stuff. The first is nudge theory, that in the hierarchically managerially centric processes of the past, what would happen is the top would decide and they would tell the bottom, and the bottom has no choice. They would just implement, or they would lose their job, or the consequences would be too big for them. We've seen now in modern organizations that doesn't work, right? Because if the top says something, but the middle doesn't agree, they distort the message. People on the bottom get a distorted message. And we've seen this. One of my best ones to actually case study with this are IT infrastructure changes. Because, you get the smartest people who are really good at tech going, oh, we're transitioning to a new IT system. There's no change management. There's no with them. So the individual doesn't go, what's in it for me? Therefore, what normally happens is organizations spend millions of dollars, they roll out new software, and people still use the old one.
Yeah, it's having a program and project management background as well. I have seen that more times than I can count.
100%. So it's a really easy example to get. Whereas if we did it differently, and we actually looked at the human-centric approach, we looked at, well, why is the existing software not working? Is it a failure with it? Is it a user error? Because to your point earlier, and you're exactly right, technology can already do more than humans can use it for. Right now, it can already do more. So we've got this constant seesaw, and this comes back to the idea of where we're at now, which is the fifth industrial revolution. This dance between man and machine, trying to figure out how we get the best of both. It's uncharted territory. Nobody in the history of recorded human evolution has been where we are today. So there's no playbook, there's no manual. Mm-hmm. So what we've got to do is leverage the best of managerialism with the best of human centrism and build our people. So to answer your question, I like to look at influences and use nudge theory. So the idea of nudging is if we tell you have to do something, we force it on you, it's highly unlikely it will stick unless we have massive consequences for non-compliance. So there's no resilience or presilience built into that now. It's pure compliance. If we can construct narratives, and I like to talk a lot about Simon Sinek's work in leadership. If you haven't come across his stuff, he's written some really good books on it. But he's a big advocate of purpose. Start with why. Mm-hmm. And we've had really good results with this. And there was a case example, and I'm happy to share this with you or any of your listeners, where I learned this the hard way. We got it. One of my first big contracts as a business owner was back in 2003, I think, with a very big bank back in South Africa. And we landed up training 23,000 people for them over 3 years. And the project was really written up and was highly successful in taking the culture from switched off to switched on. The mistake we made is we thought it was just training, not cultural change. And one of the big lessons we learned out of that first project was make it personal. So that project was actually called the You Matter campaign. So I don't know how much more personal you can make it. It was such a good title. And I've got a case study written up, so I can share that with anybody who wants to hear about it. But if we can find a purpose statement that everybody agrees with, and when I say everybody, there's no organization will ever get consensus. There's always going to be, even in a high-functioning organization, you'll have 5 to 10% of the people who shouldn't be there, shouldn't be working, and don't want to play. Mm-hmm. And that's in a healthy organization. In an unhealthy one, that variable figure will go up to between 30 and 60%. And if it's above that 30 or 40%, chances are that organization is on the way down and probably can't pull up. So the idea with nudging is if we get influencers to buy into our ideas, we empower them, educate them, teach them how to influence, and construct a narrative and support system that helps them. And lots of organizations, I'm sure you've experienced this, they'll talk about, business continuity champions or risk champions, or, the accountable people. Fire wardens is another example of that. As long as we have fire wardens, we're okay if a fire happens. We have these responsible people, but it's a shift in going, they're responsible. They're actually not responsible. They're influencing others. And the good news is Malcolm Gladwell wrote a really good book on, tipping point and how tipping point theory works. But it's actually really interesting that if we understand the law of diffusion of innovation, and you can quickly Google that if you've never heard that before, very simple. The idea is normally when we roll something out, the first people that grab it are innovators, and they are willing to wear the pain. In other words, poor performance, the thing that they're using doesn't work because they like being the first. Then
I didn't catch that. Could you try?
That's interesting. Then after them comes the early adopters who look at the innovators and they go, all right, they've tried it enough. It seems to have not hurt them so much. We'll grab it now. Then you get the early majority, the late majority, the laggards. Actually, in organizational cultural change, we've added a new dimension there. I call them the AAs, active antagonists. So these are people right at the end of your spectrum that they are disgruntled, they hate the company, they hate life, and almost anything you put in front of them, even if it will help them, they will hate it. These are the people, you give them a pay rise and their first response is, well, I bet you so-and-so got more. Or,
they're the ones who like to call themselves the devil's advocate, but, to try and make it soften what they're doing.
Absolutely. So it's around leveraging that. So, one of the things we drive with cultural change is not just using hierarchical mapping to go, which department should own this? It's around using social mapping, around who has the most influence in the right places. And this is where the world of risk is changing. We cannot anymore go, a safety department or a business continuity function or a risk function owns risk management or owns their piece. It's around how many aspects of the organization can they influence. And, experts in our field are very good at identifying, critical failure points or conversely critical success factors. But what we don't necessarily do is enable and empower the people around those critical success factors or critical vulnerabilities to influence each other to future-proof themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we often, and it's quite interesting, we again use risk theater. We go, we've taught them how to do a BCP, or we've done a risk workshop with them, or we've kept the risk register up to date. But it's about culture. And to summarize and close,
just because they attended that doesn't mean it sunk in. It didn't mean they were engaged. It meant I'm just here because my boss told me to.
100%. And this is, you've actually given me the perfect segue, because
we have less than 4 minutes now, believe it or not.
No worries. I will segue this within a minute, or at least I'll try. This is the segue. People always look at me and my career, and I have this often. They go, Gav, you started your career as a bodyguard and a martial artist who likes to punch and kick people. Why should we listen to you about cultural change and high performance? And for me, it's as simple as this. My whole journey has been, well, first we were training people. Then we started supplying expert bodies. Then we started building policy frameworks and system frameworks and guidance and plans. And then the harsh realization came to the fore for me in about 2012, which is none of that stuff works if people are disengaged. If they don't care and they're not interested, you can have the best tech, you can have the best people or experts, but if they don't care and those two things don't integrate, you're never going to have high performance. And if we can't even get high performance in business as usual, what happens when a disruption happens? When something unexpected happens, we crumble, we break. So never mind bouncing forward, all that happens is we implode. Okay, or at the very least freeze. And then we have got the mental health and recovery challenges that come with that. So the narrative of why we do what we do, for me, I have such strong fundamental belief in this. If we don't educate individuals, drive behavior, build robust culture, aligned to organizational outcomes, outputs that are good for me, good for you, good for us, good for the greater good. In 10 years' time, me and you will be having this conversation about the next thing that broke. And we'll be frustrated about the same pieces. So we've got a golden opportunity now. And for those of your listeners who are going, oh, COVID has been terrible, it's really frustrating. Some people have lost businesses, people have died. All of that stuff is true. But the flip side of it is we've never had a bigger opportunity because everyone has been disrupted. So pre-COVID, we started talking about this stuff in 2016. And honestly, I had so many business and government leaders look at me and go, we love what you're saying, Gav, but my whole career has been stable and my managerialism skills and my authoritative capability have enabled me to be successful. So I'm not buying what you're selling.
Yeah.
No, nobody can say that anymore. We've all been disrupted.
Yeah.
So if you work in an organization and you want to look at doing this sort of human-centric change, combined with technology, because it doesn't help we don't leverage the technology. It's just we're going to have poor performance if we've got great people with the wrong tools. This is your window. And it's a great gift we've actually been given.
And I think that's the perfect line to end this episode with. Gav, fantastic talking with you once again. There were so many, every time you talk, I start writing things down and you're like, oh, I want to ask him about that. Oh, that reminds me about this. And, so who knows, maybe we will end up talking again for a third show. We'll have to see if we missed anything on our agenda. And I have a feeling there is.
And anytime, and equally happy, if your listeners have specific areas of interest that they want to send you, we'd love to hear more about this or more about that, or here's the problem I have. For me, my passion at the moment is we need to find these early adopters. We need to find people like you who get this and want to figure out how to hack the system and help empower them and give them the tools and the knowledge to change. Mm-hmm. So anytime you want, reach out. I'm happy to chat.
I'll put your company's email address in the description of the show when I submit it to Voice America and YouTube. So
thanks. Awesome. Thanks. And on that too, you can include the Presilience website because there's a lot of tools there. We've actually recently put up 20 short instructional videos that cover the journey from compliance to Presilience, and it's free. So why not?
Hey, what's better than that? Free. So we've come to the end. Thanks again, Gav. I know you and I are going to chat as soon as I hit the stop button here again. But it's been fantastic talking with you once again. And to everybody listening and watching, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.